When Nuru opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was a clear sky, a deep blue color that seemed to soothe his exhausted body. He wondered if he was dead, as the last thing he remembered was being adrift on a poorly constructed raft, his only hope of escaping the shipwreck that had left him stranded in the vast ocean. However, he was not alone. In front of him stood a group of women, all beautiful and strong-looking, gazing at him with astonishment and curiosity. "Am I in the afterlife?" Nuru asked in a whisper, his throat dry and sore. 3 of the women let out nervous giggles, covering their mouths with their hands, while a 4th, taller and with an authoritative demeanor, stepped forward. "No, sir, you are not dead. You are a miracle that has arrived on our island. Our prayers have been answered," she said, and her words echoed in Nuru's mind. He blinked, dazed, unable to fully comprehend. What followed was a mix of amazement, relief, and confusion. The women gently pulled him from the raft to the shore of a lush island, tending to him by cleaning his wounds and giving him water. The leader of the group, named Kira, explained that he was on the island of Senda, a place inhabited solely by women since the mysterious disappearance of all the men more than a decade ago. No woman had seen a man until Nuru appeared. Nuru was taken to a nearby hut where the women cared for him with a delicacy he hadn't experienced in a long time. They offered him exotic fruits, fresh water, and laid him on a bed of soft leaves. The island's healer, named Luma, attended to his wounds, rubbing ointments with a sense of medicinal plants on his arms and chest. While they looked after him, Nuru tried to piece together what was happening. His last clear memory was of the shipwreck that left him alone in the ocean, and now he found himself on an island filled with women. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. Let's continue. 4 days, the women of the island watched over him carefully, some out of curiosity, others with a devotion that overwhelmed him. Every morning, one of the women would approach his bed and wake him with a kind smile, offering him food and drink. Soon, Nuru noticed that the women treated him not just as a guest but almost as a figure of reverence. The day he finally stood and walked around the village, the first thing he noticed was the complete absence of men. As he walked through the central plaza, the women stopped and looked at him with a mixture of admiration and shyness. Still somewhat confused, Nuru approached Kira, the leader who had received him. "Where are the men?" he asked with a tone of curiosity and caution. Kira looked at him for a moment, as if deciding what to say, and finally invited him to walk with her to a nearby hill overlooking the entire island. "More than 12 years ago, the men who lived here disappeared," she began to explain. "They were our companions, our protectors, but one night they simply left. No one knows why. We only know they walked toward the ocean and never returned. We have been alone ever since." Kira's story left Nuru in silence. He looked at the horizon as the sea breeze gently blew, realizing he was in a situation entirely unlike anything he had ever imagined. Not only was he the only man on the island, but to them, he was a kind of hope, a possibility of restoring something lost. As days passed, Nuru began to meet more women of the island. Some were strong warriors who patrolled the island's borders, while others were dedicated to agriculture, fishing, or crafts. Life on Senda seemed to function harmoniously, but beneath that apparent peace lay a shadow of sadness, a pain that Nuru could feel in the eyes of many of them. The absence of their loved ones was palpable. One night, as the stars glittered in the clear sky, Kira approached Nuru by the campfire where he rested. "I want you to know that your arrival here is no coincidence," Kira said, sitting beside him. "We have been praying for years for the gods to send us a sign, a response. Perhaps you are that answer." Nuru, who had heard stories of miracles and destinies in his youth, didn't know how to reply. He only knew that something within him was beginning to awaken, a sense of responsibility he couldn't ignore. These women were placing their hopes in him, and though he felt overwhelmed, he was determined to help them in any way he could. "I'll do what I can for you," he replied firmly. "But I need to understand more. What happened to the men? Why did they leave? And what do you expect of me?" Kira looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "There's something we haven't told you," she admitted. "It wasn't just a disappearance, they were taken. The legends say that spirits of the ocean, sirens with immense power, came to our island and took the men. They dragged them beneath the water, and we haven't heard from them since. Some say they're alive, enslaved in some underwater realm. Others believe they died long ago. We don't know for certain, but we believe you can help us find the truth." The revelation left Nuru stunned. The legends of sirens and sea creatures were familiar to him, but he had always considered them old tales meant to scare the young. However, the pain in Kira's eyes was real, and Nuru couldn't ignore it. That night he couldn't sleep. The idea that the men might be held captive somewhere, suffering at the hands of mystical beings, disturbed him deeply. At dawn he decided he had to act. "I'm going to find them," he told Kira as the sun began to light up the sky. Kira looked at him with disbelief at first, but soon her eyes filled with hope. "It's a dangerous journey," she warned, "but if you truly wish to go, I'll help you." Together, Kira and the other women began to prepare Nuru for the journey. They provided him with provisions, weapons, and an ancient amulet that, according to the island's beliefs, would protect him from the ocean's dark powers. When Nuru was ready, he stood at the edge of the sea, gazing into the depths. The water seemed calm, but he knew that beneath its surface lay dangers he couldn't imagine. He turned one last time toward Kira, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and admiration. "I'll return," he said firmly. Kira nodded. "We'll be waiting for you." Nuru dove into the water, feeling the cold envelop his body as he descended. As he swam into the unknown, he recalled the teachings of his mother, who had taught him how to survive the most difficult situations. But this time, it wasn't just his life at stake. He was fighting for the freedom of Senda's men, for the lives of the women who had saved and cared for him. The ocean began to darken around him, but the amulet hanging from his neck emitted a soft glow that guided him. He swam deeper and deeper until finally, he saw something he hadn't expected. A massive coral gate adorned with pearls and shells, appearing to be the entrance to another world. Without hesitation, Nuru pushed the door and ventured into the underwater realm. Crossing the coral gate felt like stepping between two realities. The underwater kingdom before him was vast, with enormous coral columns reaching upward like trees in an underwater forest. The light came from bioluminescent sea creatures drifting in the water, illuminating a dreamlike landscape. But despite its beauty, Nuru couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. As he swam deeper, following the glow of the amulet, he began to see figures in the distance. Approaching them, he realized they were men, moving slowly with clumsy motions and vacant stares. They wore rags, and some had coral shackles on their wrists and ankles. A chill ran through Nuru's body. He knew these were the men taken from Senda Island. Cautiously, he approached one of them, a man with a lost expression who was leaning over a water pond as if searching for something that wasn't there. "Hey," Nuru whispered, trying not to alarm him. "Are you from Senda?" The man slowly lifted his head, his empty eyes momentarily flickering with recognition. But the light in his gaze quickly faded again. "There is no escape," the man murmured. "They have us." Nuru felt a wave of compassion and anger surge through him. He couldn't let this continue. He resolved to act quickly before the sirens noticed his presence. Slipping between the coral formations, he moved quietly. In the distance, he saw a group of men chained and laboring in what appeared to be an underwater mine. Their faces were marked by exhaustion, and their bodies weakened from inhuman effort. But what caught his attention the most was the figure of a tall, slender woman, terrifyingly beautiful, overseeing everything from a raised rock. Her eyes glowed with a green light, and her hair swayed as though caught in an invisible current. Nuru immediately knew she was one of the sirens. He hid behind a coral column, observing her closely. The siren seemed to have absolute control over the men, who didn't even dare to lift their gaze to look at her. Nuru wondered how many more like her might inhabit this realm and how powerful they could be. I must act at night, he thought, when they're most vulnerable. Nuru's plan was simple but risky. He would free the men when the sirens were least alert. He knew he couldn't face them directly, not without endangering his life and the lives of the men. But with the amulet, he felt he had a slight advantage, and he clung to that hope. He waited until the bioluminescent lights began to dim, marking the passage of time in the underwater world. The sirens, though powerful, seemed to need rest, and Nuru seized the moment. He slipped among the prisoners, cutting their chains with a dagger strapped to his leg. At first, the men didn't understand what was happening, but soon their eyes filled with life again as they realized Nuru was there to free them. "Let's go. We have to get out of here," he whispered while cutting the chains of a tall, robust man. "I know the way." The group began to move slowly but determinedly. The men, though weakened, followed Nuru with the hope of returning to the surface and reuniting with their families. But just as they were about to reach the threshold of the coral gate, a terrifying scream echoed behind them. "You cannot leave!" The voice of a siren boomed through the water, and Nuru felt fear seize his body. The siren, followed by two others, reached them in the blink of an eye. Her eyes glowed with fury, and her hands began to emit a dark light, as if channeling a powerful force. The water currents stirred violently, pushing Nuru and the men backward. "Run!" Nuru shouted, gripping his dagger. The men started running toward the gate, but the sirens weren't about to let them escape. One of the sirens unleashed a bolt of energy, striking two of the men and knocking them to the ground. Nuru knew they couldn't face the sirens without a better plan, but then he remembered the amulet. Grabbing it with both hands, Nuru raised it toward the sirens and activated it. The amulet began to glow with blinding intensity, enveloping the creatures in a brilliant light. The sirens shrieked, covering their eyes as they recoiled. Seizing this moment of distraction, Nuru and the remaining men dashed through the coral gate, emerging back into the open ocean. As they swam toward the surface, Nuru felt the weight of victory but also the lingering danger. The sirens could still pursue them, and the men were weak. Yet the amulet continued to glow on his chest, giving him a sense of protection. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Nuru and the men broke through the surface of the water and reached the shores of Senda Island. The women were waiting for them, and cries of joy and relief filled the air as the men reunited with their wives and daughters. Kira ran to Nuru with tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said, embracing him tightly. Nuru, exhausted but triumphant, simply nodded. He had kept his promise. The men were safe, and the sirens had been defeated, for now. That night, Senda Island celebrated as it hadn't in years. A fire blazed in the center of the village, and laughter and songs echoed everywhere. Families were reunited, and the community had been restored. But Nuru knew that, while they had won this battle, the sirens would remain a threat. Kira, who had been watching Nuru from a distance, approached him once more. This time, her expression was filled with gratitude and something more. "You've given us a new chance," she said with a smile. "You are part of our community now. You are our hero." Nuru looked at Kira, feeling a warmth in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt he belonged, that he had a purpose. And though the journey had been difficult, he realized he had found more than just an island to rest on. He had found a home. Tell me in the comments what you thought of today's story. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories.